Hey guys, it's Miss Naramore again, and we're going to pick up where we left off last week. We stopped at the end of chapter 8. Remember, the PDF for Milkweed is posted in Google Classroom, so you can follow along there. Or if you have a packet, it will be printed in your packet, so you can follow along as I read. Also, make sure to read over the questions in the study guide before you read Milkweed or listen to me. That way you know what you're listening for. Remember, we talked about that in class. Always read through the questions if you have the opportunity, so you know what the most important information you need to listen to hear as we read. Okay? We're going to start in chapter 9, and this is on page, well, it doesn't give a page number, but this is in the PDF file. Winter. Chapter 9, Winter. They came in the night. I heard them above us, shouts, laughter, glass smashing, the hair tonic bottles, all the beautiful colors. Yuri hauled me out of bed. Coat, coat. I fell in the dark for my coat. Shoes. I grabbed my shoes. He dragged me into the hatch door that opened from the cellar to the backyard. Run, he said as we got outside. I wouldn't move. My candy. He smacked me. We ran. Shouts behind us. Gunshots. The yellow stone bouncing at my throat. We ran for a long time, stopped to put on our shoes, ran. We came to the jagged walls of a bombed out building. We picked our way through the rubble. Glass glittered in the moonlight. Frost sparkled on tumbled bricks and fallen timbers. Yuri took my hand. We went down into the rubble. Yuri felt along, found a place. Okay, he said, sleep. I slept. I dreamed I was standing underwater. A waterfall maybe, or a faucet splashing in my face. My eyes. I struggled to breathe. I woke up. Above me, at the edge of the rubble, stood a boy with school books strapped over his shoulder. Blue sky above him, a boy laughing, urinating in my face. Get out, Yuri shouted and threw a brick. The boy vanished. We went from that place to another and another. We slept in many places. All were cold. Sometimes I woke with snow in my ear. Never again did we sleep in beds or sit in chairs or reach into an icebox for food. We walked the streets. Yuri kept looking about. Sometimes he pulled me quickly into a doorway or a dark space between buildings. We did not go into any shop with a star on its window. Whenever I heard a horse, I looked to see if it was Greta. Yuri had to go farther and farther to find pickles. He continued to find cans of meats and vegetables, jars of fruits and peanuts. He always took 2 of each. Candy he stole just for me. When I found a hazelnut buttercream, I could hardly chew it for laughing. I used to see the brown paper bread bags everywhere I went. Now there were not so many. One day when I snatched a loaf of bread, the lady called after me, Stop, dirty Jew! I stopped. I turned and faced her. I shouted back as sternly as I could, I'm not a dirty Jew. I'm a gypsy. My name is Misha Pilduski. She threw her hands in the air. She called out to the people on the sidewalk, A dirty gypsy! Stop him! She started running after me. The brown snout of her fox fur bounced up and down on her shoulder. I had never gotten angry at a bread lady before. I turned the bag upside down and dumped the loaf to the ground. I jumped on it with both feet. I kicked it into the street. I laughed at the running lady and shouted, Dirty bread lady, and sped away. The next day I stole 5 loaves. As I snatched each one, I shouted my name into the face of the person. Misha Pilduski, Misha Pilduski, Misha Pilduski, Misha Pilduski, Misha Pilduski. Tongue tied. You cuckoo, said Yuri when I got back. It's too much. You're wasting. He took 4 of the loaves. I'll give it to the orphans. What are orphans? I said. Children without parents, he said. Like you? Like me, like Cuba, like all of us. Except for me, I said. I have a mother and father and 7 brothers and 5 sisters. I forgot, he said, except for you. We took the bread to the orphans. They lived in a large square house of gray stone. Yuri rang the bell. The door opened. Yuri said, Dr. Korczak, here's the bread for the orphans. The man looked at us. He was bald. The hair was not the hair that was not on top of his head seemed to have fallen to the bottom of his face, as he had a dense white mustache and a goatee like a broom. We smiled and nodded. Thank you, he said. I peered into the dimness behind him, trying to catch sight of an orphan, but he was closing the door. I had an idea. The next day I snatched 2 loaves of bread. One I gave to Yuri, and the other I took to the house of Janina, the girl. It had snowed overnight. Brown stubble poked through the white blanket covering the garden. I pushed the snow from the top step. I set the loaf down, knocked on the door, and ran. The next day I came back to look. The bread was gone. That's how it started. Chapter 10. From then on, I tried to snatch 2 loaves each day. I would save one for Yuri and me and leave the other on the back step of Janina's house. One time I looked up and saw her staring at me from the back window. She smiled. I smiled. I began to find things on the step where I left the bread. I found a gumdrop and a candy cigarette and a fancy button. I always looked at the window, but she was never there again. One day I left the bread and picked up a little black and white glass dog no bigger than my thumbnail. I was fascinated. I walked off, staring at the tiny dog, turning it over in my fingers. I was almost home. We were living in a stable loft then, when suddenly I turned and ran back to the house. It was in my mind to pound on the door to make her come out so I could say something to her. When I got there, someone was on the step, a boy. He turned and saw me. He stuffed the bread into his coat and ran. I ran after him. Stop, thief! I called up to him. I grabbed his long black coat, but he kept on running. He was a shoulder and a head taller than me. I was his tail. I tripped and let go. I ran after him again. We dodged in and out of people. They did not seem to notice us. Suddenly he turned and I ran into his fist. Next thing I knew, I was in the gutter. Pinpricks of frozen rain were falling. There was something hard in my mouth. I spit it out. It was a tooth. I reached into my pocket. The glass dog was smashed. At home, Yuri's eyes bulged when he saw me. What happened to you? I told him. You're too little to fight, he said. You don't fight, you run. He cleaned me up. He wiped the blood from my face and ears and neck. When he touched my face, it hurt. He kept muttering, stupid, stupid. Next time, I wasn't stupid. I went at night. There was no one on the streets. I wondered where the people were. The street lights were like moons cupped in iron fingers. Behind Janina's house, there was no light at all. I ran my hand across the step. I felt something. I put it in my pocket. I put the bread on the step. I looked up at the window, but it was even darker than night. Somewhere in the house, Janina was sleeping. I waved at the dark, empty window and went away. Back on the street, I heard a shout. I turned. Someone stood up in the street, in the shadow. He stepped into the light. I heard a pop, saw a flash, felt a tug on my ear. I reached up. I couldn't feel my earlobe. Someone was shooting at me. I ducked into the nearest air shaft and made my way along the alleyways. My ear hurt. I cried. Yuri came to me. When I told him what had happened, he flicked his cigarette lighter to me. He smacked me and stuffed a rag against my ear. Stupid, stupid. I can't find my earlobe, I told him. They shot it off, he said. Who? The jackboots. Who do you think? The jackboots. Who do you think? Why did the jackboots shoot my ear? Because of the curfew. What's the curfew? I said. He turned off the cigarette lighter. He was a voice in the black dark. Curfew means all Jews off the street after dark. But I'm not a Jew. If they shoot at you, you're a Jew. I told you not to go out at night. You don't listen. He flicked on the lighter and smacked me again and flicked off the lighter. It was true. He had told me. It was also true that I didn't listen. I sneaked out while he slept. To show him I understood, I smacked myself. Before I went to sleep, I remembered my pocket. I pulled out the thing I had found on Janina's step. Feeling it, I could tell it was a hair bow. I guessed it was red, the one she had wore on her birthday. I put it in a bread bag where I kept all the things she left on the steps. The next day, Yuri tied a rope against my wrist. Teach you a lesson, he said. We went off to meet the boys. We met them in a cemetery. They laughed when they saw me. He's on a leash. Bow wow. Toss him a bone. Look. He was in a fight with another dog. It bit his ear off. Let him alone, Yuri said. Let me alone, I said. I have 7 brothers and 5 sisters. They laughed even louder, but they left me alone. There was smoke blowing There was smoke blowing Ferdy and Alec with one arm and grim-faced Enos with the rest of them. But there was no pile of treasures anymore, and there were no cigars, and no one threw food about. But there were cigarettes. Ferdy pulled a handful from his pocket, and everyone lit up, even me. It was my first cigarette. He's smoking, exclaimed Cuba, who was a clown. He'll stunt his growth. How can he? He's already smaller than a cockroach. And then Cuba the clown charged in one arm Oleg. The 2 of them wrestled, but it was no match. Oleg was much better with 2 legs than Cuba with 2 arms. Oleg had Cuba wrapped like an octopus, Cuba squealing and flailing. Cuba grabbed Ferdy's leg and bit it. Ferdy screamed, and in a moment everyone but Yuri and I, grim-faced Enos, was on the ground, even me with my leash. We laughed and bit and wrestled, and I think we must have looked like one squirming creature with many heads, arms, and legs. At last we peeled apart and flopped to the ground, exhausted and laughing. My ear was bleeding again and hurting. I pressed a fistful of dry grass to it. Except for Cuba, we sat on the ground and talked and laughed and smoked our cigarettes. But that didn't last long, as the frozen ground was even colder than the air. One by one we stood. We milled about. We bumped into each other and grappled. We made a game of giving and receiving bear hugs. To see who is strongest, we said, but I think this was too close. In the cemetery, our bodies were the only fires. Some of us played hide and seek among the tombstones. I was it, and when I went seeking, I came up to a tombstone such as I'd never seen before. Raising up from a great block of stone was a man with wings. He was looking at the sky, as if he might fly off at any moment. I couldn't take my eyes away. Hey, Gypsy, came a voice. Come on, we're hiding. But I stood there, staring up at the great stone man with wings. Soon others were standing by. Who is he? I said. It's an angel, said Ferdy. What's an angel? I said. Grim-faced Enos said, There are no angels. I looked at him. I pointed to the man with wings. So what is that? Just stone, he said. It's not real. It's something jackboots believe. I believe, said Oleg. He scratched the stump of his missing arm. There are angels. You just can't see them. Why not? I said. Are they hiding? They're invisible. I looked around. I had to agree. If they were there, they were invisible, all right. Which made it especially good to have a stone stoss of one. At least I could see that. What do they do? I said. They don't do horse flops, said Enos. They help people, said Oleg. When you're in trouble, they help you out of it. Enos snorted. He ground out a cigarette on the foot of the stone angel. Where were they when you got pushed to the tracks of the train and ran over your arm? He grabbed the empty sleeve of Oleg's missing arm and flapped it in his face. Where were your angels then? Why didn't they roll you off the tracks? Why didn't they stop the train? He pointed to a boy called Big Henrik. His shoes were bank coin bags. Look at him. Why don't angels give him shoes or brains to want them? And him, jabbing his finger at John, who was thin and gray and never spoke. Look at him. He's dying and he doesn't even know it. Enos was shouting now. What are your angels doing for him? He spit on the stone angel. All was quiet until the cry, Jews, came skimming over the tombstone. We turned to look. A black wagon was coming down the path. The lumbering horse wore a black shawl over its mane. A line of people, black-shawled and lumbering like a horse, followed the wagon. It was a small wagon, a cart just big enough to hold the coffin. A man was shaking his fist. Jews! Hooligan Jew boys, filthying up the cemetery. Several of them left the line and headed towards us, shouting. We flung our cigarettes and ran. My leash flapped wildly, slapping tombstones. Suddenly, Cuba stopped. We turned his back to men, dropped his pants, and bent over and gave them a good long look. The running men shouted louder, but not louder than we laughed. In the stable that night, in the straw-smelling darkness, I said to Yuri, "Is Enos right? There are no angels?" There was no answer. "Are you sleeping?" "I'm trying to," came his voice. "Your silly questions. How do I know? Enos is whatever you want him to be." "You want him to be right?" "No," I said. "I want him to be wrong." "Fine, he's wrong." "I want to believe in angels, I think." "Fine, believe." But Enos said angels are for jackboots. "You're a donkey, that's what you are, and a silly one." "You don't say I'm stupid anymore. Now I'm silly. Take your pick. But I'm not a jackboot. How can I believe in angels?" "When you're nothing, you're free to believe anything. Go to sleep, Misha." I tried to go to sleep, but a question kept nagging me. "Yuri?" He snarled. "What?" "Do you believe in angels?" "I believe in bread," he said. "Now shut up or I'll come over there." I shut up. Chapter 11. As if heeding Yuri's words, bread soon became something more to believe in than to eat. One day I went to my usual spot, street corners near bakeries. These were the best. I waited at first. No one came along with a bread bag. In fact, not even one came out of the bakery. I went to the next spot. Same thing. All day I went from the corner to corner. Nothing, not a single loaf of bread did I see. I did something I almost never did. I entered a bakery. It was a bakery with a yellow star painted on the window. I was shocked. On the shelves against the wall there was no bread at all, only a single sad roll. Behind the glass in the case were 2 or 3 cupcakes. The baker came from the back room. "You want to buy something?" he growled. I stared at the roll. It was better than nothing, but it was too high for me to reach. My speed and quickness were useless. I showed him a yellow stone. "Trade?" I said. I would have not given it to him. I just wanted to trick him into taking down the roll. But his face turned red. He jabbed at the door. "Out! Get out of here, you little thief!" He reached for me, but I was gone. Back in the stable, I said to Yuri, "There's no more bread." "Learn to eat pickles," he said. I did. I learned to eat a lot of things. If there was no food on the streets, under the arms of the ladies in the fox fur, if there was no food on the streets under the arms of the ladies in the fox-face furs, I went to the shops. If the shelves of the shops were bare, I went to the homes. There was always food in the homes, especially in the large, fine homes, the houses that the ladies of the fox-face furs went back to. I had to be patient. It was hard to find an unlocked door. I learned to look for little children playing outside a large, fine house. When they went back inside, they often forgot to lock the door. In I walked, sometimes right behind the child. Some children looked back at me and said, "Who are you?" "Misha Pilsudski," I said. Some children said nothing. They seemed to think that if I strolled in the door with them, I must belong. I walked straight to the dining room or kitchen. What happened then depended on who or where the people were. If there were only children, I might say, "Where are the cookies?" or "Where is the candy?" If there were grown-ups about, I grabbed the first thing I saw and ran. If there was no one or a very young child, I would take my time shopping in the kitchen. One time I entered a house through an unlocked back door. I heard voices and laughter. I moved to the kitchen and suddenly found myself standing in the doorway, staring at a family having dinner around a long table. Food and silver and glass sparkled everywhere. In the middle was a great golden roasted bird, perhaps a goose or turkey. I must have surprised them, for all the movement stopped as they stared at me while I stared at the table. But not for long. As always, I was the first to move. I believe this was the first rule of life I learned, though it was a twitch in my muscles rather than a thought in my head. Always be the first to move. As long as that happened, they would have no time to catch me, and I could not be caught. I snatched the bird by the leg and bolted to the back door before they had time to leave their seats. Of course, I could not do this more than once at any house, but there was many large, fine homes in Warsaw. Yuri tied me to his own wrist when we went to sleep so I could not deliver food to Janina in the night. During the day, I left the things on the back step, a jar of jam, a drumstick, but I could never be sure they were not stolen. When the bread started to go, so did the trees. I heard them going early one morning. I felt the night leash tug on my wrist. I joined Yuri at the window of the loft. Outside men were standing knee-deep in the snow, chopping down trees. Why are they chopping trees? I said. Firewood, he said. People are running out of coal. They're cold. Wherever we went looking for food, we heard the sounds of hatchets and saws and trees. Some trees fell with almost a silent whoop in the pillow of the snow. Some gave a groan. Some shrieked in protest. One, a thick burly monster of a tree with warts, came down with a high, thin wail that sounded exactly like a baby crying. Soon the parks were nothing but dry grass and stumps. One day Yuri went off by himself and came back with a sack of coal. Black pearls, he said. He took the black pearls to Dr. Korzik to keep the orphans warm. The next day I went searching for The next day I too went searching for black pearls. I scrounged deep into the rubble of collapsed buildings, tunneling for coal bins. I found a piece here, a piece there, but it was mostly coal dust. When my sack was finally full, I marched to the orphanage and rapped on the brass knocker. An orphan boy came to the door. His mouth dropped open. His eyes bulged when he saw me. I blurted, "I'm not an orphan. I have 7 brothers and sisters." I held out the sack. He ran. In a moment, Dr. Skorznik appeared. Again, I held out the sack. "Black pearls," I said. "Keep you warm." His great white mustache stretched in both directions, and he laughed. "You," he pointed at me, "are the black pearl." He disappeared from the doorway. He returned with a mirror. "Look." A face black as coal itself stared back at me. I never knew eyes were so white. I looked at the rest of me, my hands, my clothes. I was a walking lump of coal. "I'm black," I said. He laughed again. Not for long. He took the sack of coal and led me into the house. He waved his arm. "Welcome to our wonderful home." Soon I was in something called the bathtub, and a lady on her knees was scrubbing me with a brush and soap. And I became white again, and my stone became yellow again, and the water became black as jackboots. In distant rooms, I heard laughter and the sound of running feet. I felt orphan eyes on me, but I could not see anyone. Dr. Korzik brought me new clothes, the second person ever to do that. As I put them on, he said, "So, little sack of warmth, I think you're a gypsy, am I right?" "Yes," I told him. "I used to be stupid, now I'm silly." He laughed a lot. "Who told you that?" "Yuri," I said. "Yuri is my friend. Do you believe in angels?" He stopped laughing. He stared at me. "Yes, I do believe in angels." "So do I said, deciding for once and for all. "Yuri believes in bread." He nodded. "Yes, I believe in bread too." He was always smiling. His mustache made it seem a double smile. "What is your name, little man?" "Misha Pilduski," I said proudly. His eyebrows went up. "Ah, yes." He nodded and closed his eyes. He's heard of me, I thought. "Misha Pilduski." He seemed to be tasting my name. "Tell me, Misha Pilduski, where do you live?" "In the stable," I said, "with Yuri, but the horses are gone." "And tell me, do you happen to be an orphan, Misha Pilduski?" I loved his goatee even more than his mustache. It was so soft and white. I wanted to rub my face in it. I wanted to climb in it and live there and peek out. I think he wanted me to be an orphan very badly. I hated to disappoint him. "Oh no," I said. "I have 7 brothers and 5 sisters, and a mother and father and a great-grandmother who's 109 years old, and a horse named Greta, if I can ever find her." I told you how we had been bombed by jackboots and the whole story. I told him how we had been bombed by jackboots and the whole story. Then Dr. Korzik left me waiting for a few minutes. When he returned, he led me to a great front room. I was amazed. There they were, the orphans, orphan boys and orphan girls, all of them standing at attention in rows wall to wall. Dr. Korzik snapped his fingers and everyone said at once, "Thank you, Misha Kabuski." I was uncomfortable. I didn't know what to say. Dr. Korzik shook my hand and opened the front door for me. "Come see us again," he said. I walked away in my new clothes. Chapter 12. I continued to bring black pearls to Dr. Korzik and the orphans. To Janina's back step, I brought black pearls and bread when I could. I began to notice there was no longer a gift waiting for me. One day I knocked on the back door. A man answered. I knew he was a jackboot even in his socks. His gray and silver jacket was unbuttoned, showing a stained t-shirt and suspenders. In one hand was a stain of beer. "Where's Janina and her family?" I said. He growled something at me in jackboot language. His breath was oniony. I repeated forcefully, "Janina!" He took a swig of beer. He pointed at the bag of coal in my hand. I held it out. "Black pearls," I said, "for Janina." He snatched them from me. He pointed at me. "Jude?" That word I knew. "No," I said, "I'm a gypsy." He cocked his head as if to hear better. I stood at attention. "Gypsy." He raised his hand. I thought he was going to salute me, but he didn't. He slapped me and overturned the stain of beer onto my head. He raised his... I snatched the bag of coal back from him. I swung the bag and brought it down with all my might on his stocking foot. He yowled. I ran. One morning after awakening in our stable, I was walking to the stall where we peed. I saw a man in another stall. He was curled up like a bean. He wore a long black coat. He lay in the straw. I squatted down beside him. Suddenly one eye opened and he stared at me. He sat up. "Do you live here?" I said. Straw poked from his head like extra hair. "I live nowhere," he said. "I live here with my friend Yuri," I told him. "Do you want to live with us?" He looked around as if there was something he could not find. He shrugged. "Maybe." Did you once live in a big house?" I said. I was thinking of Janina. "The house was big," he said, "but I only lived in 2 rooms." "With your children?" He looked at me. "With my books." I studied his face. "You're not a Jew, are you?" I said. His eyes shifted. He sat straighter. "Why do you ask?" "You don't have a beard." He stood. He peered into the next stable. "That's because I'm not Jewish. Did someone tell you to ask?" "No." He repeated, "I'm not a Jew. Do you believe me?" "Yes," I said. "I'm not a Jew either. I'm a gypsy. I'm glad I'm not a Jew." He walked to the nearest window and looked out. "Glad, are you?" "I think so," I said. "But sometimes I'm not sure. Jews get shot at and they have to ride horses backwards and scrub the sidewalk with their beards. But I don't have a beard, and I think I might like to get painted." He was looking at me, but he didn't seem to see me. "Would you like to have some bratwurst?" I said. "We have bratwurst." I waited. At last he nodded. I went for the bratwurst. When I returned, the man was gone. When Yuri and I walked the streets, I had strict instructions. I was to walk as if I knew where I was going. I was to look straight ahead. I was not to laugh or scream or dance or anything to call attention to myself. "Be invisible," he said. "Like an angel?" I said. He ignored me. He said I was to look as if I had nothing to hide, as if I belonged there. "Most of all," Yuri said, poking me in the chest, "don't look guilty." "What's guilty?" I said. "It's doing something you're not supposed to do." "That's easy," I said. "I'm not guilty." I had forgotten about snatching Janina's birthday cake. "Fine," he said. "Just don't look it." I found a scrap of mirror. I looked into it. I practiced looking not guilty. I walked back and forth in the stable, looking straight ahead, looking as if I had nothing to hide. When we went outside in the center of the city among the crowds of people, I said to Yuri, "Look," and crossed the street by myself. I held my head high. I looked straight ahead. I looked as not guilty as anyone ever looked, as if I knew exactly where I was going. I got hit by an automobile. It was only a bump. The car screeched and stopped and hit me just hard enough to knock me off my feet. The driver was screaming, people were staring, and the next thing I knew, Yuri was dragging me by the collar of my coat and at the same time kicking me in the rear, and people were laughing. Yuri wasn't laughing. He dragged me out of sight into an alley and dropped me like a sack of coal. He hissed in my face, "Did I tell you to call attention to yourself, you stupid little turd?" I looked up at him. I nodded. Back to stupid. I had never seen him so mad. His hair looked redder than ever, only this time it was not because he was laughing. He punched me in the forehead. The back of my head banged against the wall. "Someday I'm going to have to kill you to keep you alive." He flapped his arm. "You want to do it your way? You want to go off by yourself? Not listen to me? Go ahead." He kicked me. "Go ahead." He stomped off. By the time he reached the street, I was at his side. I was sure then that I would never again disobey Yuri. But I did not know about the beautiful horses. This video stops there, and then I'll pick up with chapter 13 in the next video.